Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see you again, or somebody of you have come only for today. We are a little less people than we were yesterday, but I hope this is not caused by the meal we had yesterday. So I hope everybody who's here is in good form and curious about the presentations we have, because what we had yesterday was all about saline farming in practice. We had the presentation from Henrik Aronson about saline farming as such, and which variety of crops are suitable, and fertilizers and things like that. And then we had the presentation from Masmir Olmas, who told us everything about soil management. And you went out for the excursion to see the fields of SPMA in Kolomagard and of the double dike. It's a little bit rainy, but I hope you enjoy it. Next, today we will talk about the products from saline farming, and as you can see, we have some there already, and we have more of them, and everybody of you can take after the break, or when you have to leave, you can take one bag of potatoes and one bag of saline carrots home with you, and you can try them. So we had saline carrots yesterday already, you know how they taste. But that is a little present from the farmer from Tesla who cannot be here today, because it is a present. So today it's all about products and what to do with them, and what is in them, and what they mean for your health, and what they mean for marketing and everything. And I would like to ask Thayna Mendanha from Aarhus University. She's a postdoc researcher, and she's a specialist on halophytes, and she has done fantastic, interesting research. Thayna, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm a postdoc at Aarhus University at the Department of Food Science. And today I will, together with my colleague Ulla, present you what we have done on the SalFar project. And we were asked to grow plants in more controlled conditions, so we could both know how the yield response is to irrigation with salt water, but also how the taste is when we give plants irrigation with salt water. So it's actually two presentations. First, I will talk of the effects of salinity into the yield of two different crops, and then Ulla will talk about the effect of salt on the taste of different species. We have chosen two different species to grow under saline conditions. One is Rucula or Arugula or rocket plant, has many different common names, which is this one. And the other is the ice plant that I think everyone had for dinner last night, which is a known halophyte. So the idea was that we would compare a known halophyte with conventional crop to see how they behave under the same conditions of salt irrigation. So the design of our experiment was we had plants grown into pots, and the pots were filled with soil, with sand soil that would stick in from an organic area. So it was organic soil, and they were also fertilized with organic fertilizers. And they were actually irrigated with different salt concentrations, so 4 different salt concentrations. Fresh water, 4 decisiemens, 8 decisiemens, and 12 decisiemens. And they were also given 2 levels of fertilization, so 2 different nitrogen levels. So in total, we have 4 different treatments, and we did a lot of measurements at those plants. But today, I will just present you the plant biomass and the yield of the plants, because I also don't have many of those results yet. Yesterday we talked about a lot what is the classification of these different waters. So here you can see that the irrigation that we give to the plants, it's around, the maximum is about a brackish water. So from fresh to around 12 decisiemens, so we didn't went too high as a seawater, just a more kind of realistic amount of salt into the water. And here, let me try to explain how we did it. This is our greenhouse at our department, and we have 4 tables in each compartment. And in each table, we can divide them in smaller tables. So in each of the table, we have 6 different small tables that were connected to a tank underneath the table, and 6 different tanks. So each tank had a different concentration of salt water, and then this tank was connected to a pump that pumped each water into the drip irrigation inside each pot. So in each small compartment here, we had the salt concentration, and then they were irrigated with the drip irrigation inside the pots. So we kind of could control the amount of salt that goes into the pot, and we were careful not to let the water drain out of the pot. So everything it was kind of a closed system. So every single drop of the water stayed into the pot. Here's like just a picture of one of the measurements that we did, the gas exchange, and here as well some of the dark adaptations that I was doing to measure chlorophyllescence into the plants. So the aim of our study was to find alternative crops for organic saline soils, and to clarify the plant response of a salt tolerance plant at different levels of salt stress and nitrogen availability compared to a conventional crop. So I will start presenting the results from the rucola or arugula or rocket plant, as you prefer. And here I always have the different nitrogen levels, so half nitrogen, full nitrogen, and on the bottom we have the different salt concentrations. So as you can see, the both nitrogen levels, they follow the same trend. So as you increase salt, you decrease the biomass accumulation in the plants. This is fresh weight. But as you can see, it's actually not different. Statistically, it's not different from control, even though when you give a high concentration of salt water to the rucola. So it's a kind of salt-tolerant plant. Here you have leaf area, which is important for salad crops and leaf crops. And it's actually also follow the same trends. So as you increase the salt, you decrease the leaf area, but it's not such a sharp decrease that the plants die, so they manage to survive even though we gave them quite a high concentration of salt water in the irrigation. So when we compare those 2 treatments, so the half nitrogen and the full nitrogen, we can see there is a decrease into the both biomass accumulation and leaf area in response to nitrogen and in response to salt. So when we do statistics on that, we see there is an effect of both factors, but it's still still the plant survived. So at some point I wished I had been a little bit higher so you could see the threshold, but yeah. When we look into the ice plant, we actually see a different response. The ice plant is a halophyte, so when we increase the salt concentration, we actually increase the accumulation of fresh weight in these plants. So this is the half dose of nitrogen and the full dose of nitrogen. So as we increase salt, we increase biomass for in the both scenarios. And yeah, for the full nitrogen, there was actually a lot of variation here, but it seems like just the small addition of salt makes these plants respond to it and increase biomass. And then for the leaf area, we see the same trend. As we increase salt, we increase leaf area in the both scenarios. And yeah, and here we see the same response, but the opposite. So as we increase, for the nitrogens, the same response. We decrease the biomass accumulation with the half dose, but we increase accumulation when we add salt to the plants. And just a small observations. As I mentioned, those plants were sent for other analysis, like a full profile of metabolomics. But it was quite clear in the greenhouse that they were very different, even though we didn't see an interaction between nitrogen and salt into the yield. We could definitely see a difference into the plants that were given salt and half of dose of nitrogen. So it seems like it accelerates the age of the leaves. And you can see it's also synthesized a lot of protective pigments, photoprotective pigments in the plants that were received both treatments, half nitrogen and salt concentration. So this is the picture of the plants, and I'm not sure if you can see, but they are quite greenish here and quite reddish in those treatments with salt and nitrogen. And for the ice plant, you could actually see also difference into the way plants looked. This is control, and then you can see that they look a little bit more mush, or not so crispy and nice as the ones that were given salt. So to wrap up this part of the presentation, before I give the word to Ulla, we can say that the rocket plant, or the arugula, is a mite tolerant salt plant, salt stress. The yield of the both species were nitrogen and salt dependable. Both salt and nitrogen affect the plants at the morphological and the physiological level. And irrigation with salt increases biomass accumulation in the ice plants on an EC above 4, this is Siemens, and an AC level above 8, this Siemens tend to decrease biomass accumulation in Aruga. Yeah.
Okay, good morning everybody. My name is Ulla Kilmos, and I'm an associate professor at the Department of Food Science at Aarhus University, so I'm a colleague to Thayna, but I'm mainly working with sensory quality and consumer science instead of growing plants in the greenhouse. And that is what I'm going to talk about today. So my presentation is about the effect of salt on the sensory quality of some of the plants that you have tasted yesterday. It's rocket, and it's ice plant, and then salicornia as well. Do you know how to shift, Tanya? Okay, thank you. So first of all, how did we measure the sensory quality? We used a professional trained sensory panel, and using a trained sensory panel, then you are able to measure some of the quality aspects that can be evaluated by the different senses, human senses, and these include sight, touch, smell, hearing, and also taste. So some of the descriptors that the professional taste panel are able to evaluate are appearance descriptors, textural and mouthfeel descriptors, and then aroma, flavor, and taste descriptors. And I'll tell you some of the results that we obtained for the different plants that has been irrigated with different level of salt. So when we are using a professional trained panel, then they can be used as a kind of instrument. So we will get a holistic overview of the quality of the different products that we are evaluating, because the trained panel has been selected based on their ability to taste, and then also they have been calibrated like an instrument. I can see that something is missing. What we are evaluating is the intensity, it's the perceived intensity of the different descriptors, of the different characteristics of the product that are being evaluating. Normally we use a continuous scale going from very low to very high in intensity. So we'll get a value for each assessor, and based on the panel, then we can calculate an average for each of the descriptors, and then see the difference between the different samples for the different descriptors. What we don't measure when we are using a trained panel is how the product are perceived by the consumers. So we are not measuring the liking or the acceptance of these products, because if we would like to evaluate what the consumers are thinking about the products, then we have to do a consumer test instead. So please have in mind that it's an objective way to measure the taste or the sensory quality of the products. So the samples, as Thayna introduced you to, there was 3 samples: rocket plant, ice plant, and the Saliconia, and they were in total 8 samples that has been irrigated with 4 different salt concentration, no salt, 4, the concentration of 4, the concentration of 8, and the concentration of 12. And then 2 different nitrogen levels was applied, the full nitrogen level and the half nitrogen level. In my presentation today, I'll only focus on how the salt level, the salinity, will affect the sensory, different sensory descriptors. So I'll not tell you anything about how the nitrogen level will affect the quality. So this is an overview of the different attributes of the different descriptors that was evaluated. This is for rocket plant, and you can see that it could be some appearance descriptors, aroma descriptors, and then aftertaste, texture descriptors, or flavor and taste descriptors. Today I'll focus on the descriptors that was very similar for the 3 different products. So they include salty aftertaste, juiciness, mouth-watering texture, overall flavor intensity, so the intensity of all the flavors in combination, and then sweet taste, salty taste, and umami taste and bitter taste. These ones are the basic taste qualities, and umami taste is described as a meaty or broth taste. Then we have the seaweed taste, and also for rocket we measured mustard. We could see that there was some different in mustard flavor. So this is the overview of some of the attributes or some of the descriptors that vary significantly regarding to the salt level added in the irrigation. And this is for the rocket. As you can see, we have the different salt level on the x-axis and the intensity scores going from 0 to 15 on the y-axis. The different bars indicate different descriptors, so salty taste, bitterness, seaweed flavor, mustard flavor, overall flavor, and umami. And you can see that for rocket, it seems that the biggest differences was between if there was no salt added or if the highest level of salt was added. It seems that the highest intensity of salt taste and bitterness, salt taste, and bitterness, and seaweed flavor and overall flavor, as well as umami, was highest in intensity when the high level of salt was added. And it was less or lower when no salt was added. So addition of salt, especially in the high concentration, will definitely affect these basic taste qualities, as well as some of the flavor descriptors such as seaweed. The only one that was enhanced in the plants that was not irrigated with some salt was the mustard flavor. This was actually higher in the non-irrigated salt sample. Umami was also increased when salt was added, but it has an interaction with the nitrogen level, but still the overall picture was that it was increased, then the salt level was increased. The salinity condition also have an effect of some of the texture descriptors, as well as the aftertaste descriptors. So juiciness would also decrease when no salt was added compared to a high level of salt, and also the salty aftertaste. If we look at the ice plant, then we can see almost the same picture. So salty taste, umami, seaweed flavor, and overall flavor. Again, if no salt is added, then these parameters or these descriptors are lower in intensity compared to a high concentration of salt added. So again, likewise rocket, then addition of salt definitely have an effect on some of the basic taste qualities, like salt taste, umami, and also the over flavor and seaweed flavor. This slide shows the sourness and saltiness, and it was also affected by addition of salt. But likewise, the mustard flavor, then there was an interaction with the nitrogen level as well. but the overall picture was that the sourness decreased with decreasing concentration of salt, whereas the sweetness increased with decreasing concentration of salt. So sweetness seems to be one of the parameters that will be decreased when salt is added to the irrigation water. Likewise, the rocket, then some of the textural and aftertaste parameters that was affected was the juiciness and also the salty aftertaste. Again, we could see that a high concentration of salt will create the highest juiciness compared to no addition of salt that have a lower score for juiciness as well as salty aftertaste. For ice plant, mouth-watering texture was also affected, and the same was true that the highest mouth-watering effect was seen in the samples that had received salt in the irrigation water. Yep.
What's the difference between juiciness and
They are quite linked, but juiciness, it's how much water that are released when you are chewing the sample, right? And mouth-watering effect is a kind of feeling, how much you feel that the water is released from the plant. Does that make sense for you? Yeah. Okay. Then if we look at the Salicornia, again, some of the parameters, the flavor and taste parameters that was affected by salt addition was the salty taste, umami, bitterness, sourness, and also the overall flavor. And likewise, ice plant, then addition of salt in the irrigation water will create a higher intensity of these taste and flavor parameters compared to if no salt is added. And likewise, ice plant, then juiciness was also affected in Salicornia, having the highest intensity and also mouth-watering and the salt effect when salt is added to the irrigation water compared to if no salt is added. So what can we conclude? We can conclude that for all three species, or all three crops, there seems to be an effect on no addition of salt compared to a high level of salt addition to the irrigation water. And some of the parameters that will be increased when salt is added is saltiness and umami, overall flavor, juiciness, salty aftertaste, seaweed flavor, and mouth-watering feeling. And then for some of the species, it was only seaweed flavor and mouth-watering feeling that was affected. So these two is only for two of the species. What we also could see was that bitterness and mustard flavor was decreased when a high level of salt was added compared to no salt addition, whereas sourness was increased with increasing level of salt, and sweetness was decreased with the increasing level of salt. So the main conclusion is that the sensory quality will definitely be different for different crops. Some of the parameters might be affected in the same way, but there might also be other specific descriptors that will be affected differently compared to which crops we are looking at. I think that it's only the saltiness that is directly affected by addition of salt. We know that there is something called sensory interactions. So if you drink a cup of coffee, then you will perceive it quite bitter. If you add a spoon of sugar, then the sugar will, or the sweetness of the sugar will affect the bitterness intensity, so you will perceive it less bitter, but at the same time the bitterness from the coffee will also affect the sweetness perception of the sugar. So that is a very well-known phenomenon in sensory, and actually I think it's what happened with these plants here. So the reason why we see an enhanced effect of umami and sourness and a reduced effect on sweetness is not because they contain a higher concentration or lower concentration of these compounds. It's because there is some sensory interaction going on in the plants in relation to the salt irrigation level. And we also know that other flavors can be affected by these sensory interaction. So it's not only the basic taste that can be affected, but also other flavors as well. So the concentration of the different compounds that create these flavors and taste, they might not be changed. I can't see the reason why it would be more MSG umami that create the umami flavor when you irrigate with salt. So I think the differences in many of these attributes is due to these sensory interactions effect. Okay. Thank you for your attention.
I wonder if there are any questions for Ulla or also for Thayna, because these are very specific things they are telling us. I was amazed about this group of tasters who get trained in a special way. They're behind their
Yeah, in regard to that, the methodology was all pretty new to me, and I wasn't aware that you could calibrate humans to use them as instruments. And I'm wondering if cultural background and culinary background was taken into account, because I think that flavor perception might be affected by the country you're raised in and the flavors you've experienced. So what's your...
need a microphone.
Yeah.
Yes, as I was saying, the methodology was very interesting, and I wasn't aware that you could calibrate humans and use them as instruments in your methodology. But I'm wondering if the taste panel was international and you took into account anthropological variables and their culinary background, because isn't flavor perception somewhat influenced by that?
It's only the subjective flavor that is influenced by culture or the individual. When we are doing these kind of tests with a trained panel, then it doesn't matter who they are actually, because we won't hear about their opinion about the flavor. We are just interested in measuring the intensity of the flavor. And that is not affected by a cultural background or whatever.
So an international taste panel the flavor, the objective flavor perception or flavor statements by a variance of different cultural backgrounds, the variance would be very low, so the results would be relatively stable, you say? Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting.
The most important factors that will affect these kind of tests is their sensitivity towards different basic taste qualities. So it's individual difference how sensitive you are when you are tasting something sweet, something salt, or something bitter, or whatever. And when we select the assessors for the panel, then we select them based on their sensitivity.
Thank you.
So why then do you think that it is all like an interaction of an experience between sweet or salt? I mean, giving more salt does change the physiology of a plant, all kinds of reactive oxygen species or antioxidants, or it could very well be, I think, different flavors that are absent or present at different salt concentrations.
Yeah, I think those phenomena could be the reason why we see some differences. So it could be that there are some sensory interactions, but it could also be that the concentration of different compounds will change. And I think for the saltiness, I'm pretty sure that if we measure the salt concentration in the plant, it will be higher because the plant will absorb more salt, right? Maybe also for the seaweed flavor, there might be some additional compounds together with the salt that will create a higher concentration. I think it depends on which flavor and which taste you are looking at.
Well, I've eaten a lot of ijsgat, and sourness, for example, I'm sure is truly gets more sour when you add more salt, and maybe that has to do with the pH in the vacuole. I can see that there are true physiological differences, but yeah, I guess you have to measure something.
I think if we should divide the sensory interactions and the concentration, we have to measure, the compounds that can create some of the flavors or some of the taste. Likewise, organic acid maybe that can enhance the sourness, right?
Yeah, it's about.
Just wait for the mic.
It goes a bit in a similar direction. So it's about the specificity of the effect. So is it possible that what we see is more general stress response of the plant, which means it doesn't matter if you have salt or if it is drought or if it is the nitrogen level. So that's why I think it's interesting to compare with the nitrogen level, because I think apart from salt, I can imagine that stress also induces change in taste, also in the other factors or parameters.
Yeah, I think overall for the halophyte plants, we didn't see much of interaction between the nitrogen stress and the salt stress. But for the hoopla, there was some, as far as I remember, some interactions there.
Yeah, we could see that there, for some of the flavors and some of the taste attributes, there are some interaction, but the dominant one is the salt addition. So the nitrogen level is of minor, it has a minor effect compared to the salt addition.
Plants from organic farms and from conventional farms, and then I don't know if it's my personal impression, but these plants from organic farming, they are usually smaller, they are slightly stressed, they are not that fast growing, and usually they taste a bit more intense than from conventional farming. I thought maybe that's somehow related.
Yeah, I think definitely if you are comparing conventional and organic production methods, then they will have an effect on the growing of the plants, and that can also affect the sensory, some of the sensory parameters, because you will have a higher concentration of some of the compounds in organic production, because they grow slower. Right? But we haven't looked into the results yet regarding the nitrogen effect. We'll have a more detailed look at these results.
Right, thank you. It's a very interesting experiment. I'm just intrigued by the use of the trained panels. I would imagine that the panel members would differ as well in terms of their perception of intensity. And I'm just wondering, to what extent the differences between the panel members, the comparison between the differences between the panel members and the differences in the crop, what they are testing, comparisons of that. And just another one is, do you think a robot might do this in the future?
What we do when we do these kind of sensory evaluation, the assessors will develop the vocabulary for the profile of the product. So actually it's them that have chosen all these attributes or all these descriptors. That's the first step. And then there is a severe training of the panel. So they will be introduced to different samples and they will have a look at their results just to calibrate them, because you're right that there could be some differences between the panelists, how they use the scale. In order to get them to use the scale in the same manner, then we do a quite severe training. So this training sessions will do that they are doing the evaluation very similar. The most important thing is that they don't mix up the samples, that they don't put one sample at the end of the score of the intensity scale, and another assessors put it on the upper part, because then you will not get any significant results. But it doesn't matter if there is a range in the flavor attribute or in the taste attributes of the part of the scale, because then you can still have some significant differences between the samples. And you can try to be tested and see if you can be used by a panel. The robot. I don't think it's possible to introduce a robot into sensory evaluation, because it's the human senses that you're using, right?
Louis?
Yeah, I got intrigued by the juiciness because I would expect that when you increase the salt concentration, that the amount of water in the crop would decrease because of this osmotic origin. But I saw from your experiment that the leaf area was decreased with increasing salt concentration and also the dry biomass. So, okay. Yeah, so the amount of water in general would decrease per volume of leaf, but the juiciness increased. So can you argue a bit on that?
Yeah, actually in the halified plants, the biomass accumulation, the fresh biomass accumulation increases with the salt, because underneath the leaf they have this kind of vesicles that the salt water goes into. So they are more crispy and more juice for the ice plant and the salicoin than for the rocket plant. The rocket plant, no, they usually more thick, I had the impression. When you do the specifically fair, you can see that they are more thick than the ones without salt. So, yeah.
Structure is more strong,
Yeah, yeah,
say,
yeah.
and that makes it crispy, more juicy.
According to the panel, yes.
Yeah, there's Louis, and then I think that should be the last question. We have to continue with the others.
I just wanted to pick in on the question by Eric, I think, about whether robots might be able to do this. If I remember correctly, you said you also send samples for metabolite profiling.
Yeah.
That's actually almost robots doing it, right? And
scientists
yeah.
doing the extractions, yeah.
I was wondering, do you see any correlation between what the tasting panel found and what you see in the metabolites, for example, for mustard taste compared to glucosinolates? And then I was also wondering, are the costs of these two methods comparative? Because maybe if tasting panels are cheaper, then we might just disregard the first rule of chemistry and start licking the spoon.
Yeah, I don't have the results yet, because it takes quite some time to ship the way to China and have the results back. So I don't have the results yet. But I don't know how much your panel costs. I know how much my metabolomes cost.
I can answer this question because normally we are very interested in getting some instrumental or some analytical methods that can be used because you know the panel is relative and it can be used every year because it will change over year, right? So it's always an advantage if you can have an instrumental or analytical method that will correlate highly with the sensory panel. Normally these instrumental and analytical methods are not as expensive as a panel because it requires quite some resources to maintain the sensory panel. So normally you will start with sensory panel and then correlate it to some instrumental or some analytical methods. The advantage using a sensory panel is that you'll get you'll get a kind of holistic overview of all the parameters at once. When you use an instrumental measurement or an analytical measurement, then you will only measure one parameters, right? So that is the advantage using a sensory panel.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Thayna. That was a good introduction. And it was also a good introduction to the questionnaires we will give you a little later, because Kate has developed a questionnaire with simple questions, not the specific questions about the meal we had yesterday. You can fill them in later. We hope you remember what you tasted yesterday evening. So, now we are coming to Dorte Storper, our partner SAGRO in the SalFar project. And Dorte is the project manager for SalFar at SAGRO, which is a farmers' umbrella organization, and Dorte also advises farmers on business models and whatever questions they have. And she will tell you more about the... Yeah.
Hello everyone. Now to something also in the SalFar project, but a bit far from the sensory analysis. This is about business strategies and business models that we are trying to intense these and extract all these informations and taste and other values into a value proposition for Saline Farming. So, as Angelica said, my name is Dorte Storper, and I'm a senior project manager at SAGRO. And SAGRO is a farmer consultancy company, quite a large one of the largest in Denmark, and we are situated at the North Sea coast. And what is important to say, we are consultants, but we are also owned and managed by the farmers themselves and the farmers' organizations. So the farmers are both the owner of SAGRO and also the customers of SAGRO. So in our application, we should make some business strategies for eco-innovative farmers and where to start. So for each of the partner regions, we started to make some kind of what is the difference between the specific information about each destination and what is the political framework in which they are working. And we did for all regions this business strategy and described the destination shortly, about their history, about their geography, the nature, and also about business and people in all these 7 areas. And then we start quite widely. Oh, I missed one hand. We start quite widely, describing the world politics that we are all working under, for instance, the UN sustainability goals, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and stuff that is very important for businesses all over the world. And narrow it down to the EU policy, the new CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy, which is not effective, all effective now, but is coming from next year very strongly and is affecting all farmers and food producers in EU. And then the more regional could be a country or a province, and the local policy as well. So all these are described for all 7 regions. And then we extracted that and went into the regional or local areas to ask them, what are your concrete action plan then? What kind of action would you take to develop in these conditions, in this political framework, and given the specific values in your destination? So I have an example of that. This is the regional business strategy for the island of Læsø. And it's an island in the Kattegat Bay of the North Sea, and it's surrounded, of course, by water, and for historical reasons they have been producing salt, traditional salt since the Vikings, so for nearly 1,000 years. So salt is, it has a specific meaning for Læsø. And if you're a Dane and you talk about salt and salt production, everyone will think of this small island. It's quite a small, it's one of the smallest municipalities. There's only 1,600 inhabitants at Læsø, and they are having a lot of food production and tourism as well, and it's all related to salt in somehow. So it was very nice to talk to them. They were all salty in their mind. They really think of salt in nearly everything. So they had some concrete action in their action plan, and it was led by the Tourism and Industry Organization and the municipality on the island. And they found these things that was important for them. They would work actively to make more coherent between the tourism and the food industry. They would like to export out of the island. And being an island, some of you of course know, you are depending on the ferry, the logistic, the freshness of the food that you can export, and there's something to be considered, especially for islands. So that is one of their. They would also like to attract more attention to their island, and therefore they would like to apply to be a World Heritage Center on the UN list. And actually they did all of this. They attacked some funding, some Danish funding for analysis and interaction between the two industries, tourism and food. So they are starting a new project at Læsø about that. And they also are now on the tentative list for World Heritage. And so they are already doing some of the things that they put on this action plans some years ago. And one thing is the framework under which you are working and your action plan, but also for every individual company. We would like to help them to make better business models individually. So what we started with was to have some workshop, and for instance at the island of Læsø we had one workshop here the 1st of March. And for that we would like to inspire all the food producers to other models, other business models that were special. It could come from Saline Farming, and our partners gave us some nice business models, inspirational business model, another way to look at the world and on their businesses, but also from other business models, food producers that did something innovative. So we gathered a lot of these best practices for them to see. And then we held the workshops, and we also facilitated the individual business models for those who wanted to have another eye on what could be done for the individual business models. So just some examples. Oh no, I forgot to say this. One of the things that we found was actually it could be nice to look at the value chain. I don't know if I can go back. Because the lower part of this presentation, you see a normal value chain. And for a lot of farmers, the value chain stops in a way. No, the value chains go on, but their interaction with their products stops when they deliver their crops at the mill, when they deliver them, when they distribute them to the factories or the mill or whatever who is taking their yield. But one of the things that we found that could be worth considering is if you shorten the value chain, that you might be more sustainable in ways. For instance, you might have a larger bite of the cake economically. You will also have the direct interaction with the customers that might be giving for you socially and your proudness about your crops, and will also have that direct input from the end users that you can use in developing your products. And also sustainability. If you sell for local consumers and local tourists, you don't have that much transport and so on. So that was one of the things we talked about. And I have different examples, these best practice examples from the different regions. And actually, when we're having our lunch, I think, upstairs, the best practice, I gathered all these best practices in, what do you call it? Gathered them together, and they will be shown upstairs, and there will be both these descriptions, like this one, and then there will also be videos. And we try to make them in English or with subtext, so I hope you can understand them. And I hope that you'll just take a look during lunch, sorry. Then about the workshops. The workshops that we are having, this one is at Læsø. We invited, and we like to inspire, as I said. So these best practices that you can see upstairs was shown in Danish and could get some discussion going and something in the participants' mind. Oh, maybe I could use some of what he said, or just be inspired or say, oh, he is doing that, but I could do differently. That was one of the things, and we also invited live best practices. You can see the invitation. It's two people. One of them has a restaurant and has started a network of marketing local food production. And the other one is situated on another island where they have used their fruit plantation for making jam and liquid and so on in a cooperation. So these two were there to inspire, to tell, and also to interact, which is not possible, of course, with the scripted and videos, but here to interact and to inspire. And we had a nice workshop where they went into matters that was important for Læsø. It was about making marketing and website sale together, not individual as they do today. It was about the World Heritage, this new group of potential buyers. How can they use that in exporting their products out of Læsø or at Læsø for a better business model for some of the companies. So a nice it was a whole day out. And then afterwards, the one interested could have some facilitating of their business model. And we sent out a template of a well-known model, the business model canvas. And we choose this model for two reasons at least. One reason is that the value proposition is important in this model, it's central. And the other is that it's well known, at least in Denmark, very well known in banks and everywhere. And we asked them to fill out with their own business model, and we invited them to a meeting where we facilitated and went through their business model. It's not that I should decide how their business model should be, but sometimes it's very nice. I just ask questions. Why did you do that? Did you think of how much could you owe on these conditions that you made? Does it make a sustainable business plan? I tell you, I really met someone who thought that just starting selling potatoes to tourists on the road that they could invest in a larger farm or something. So really go think about your business plan. Is it sustainable, both in an economic way and in the more social way? I met people for whom it was the most important thing that he and his wife could work in this company and have a cooperation, and their family should be together. So the social sustainability were more important for them, and that was from there their business model was made. So only facilitating it. Doing so at Læsø, I had the local responsible person from the tourism and industry organization, since he will be the connection to further work on the business plans. Since the SalFar project is over and I will not be staying at Læsø, so we make a big deal out of anchoring this locally, so that there will be some concrete results and there will be someone to facilitate this after the project has been done. Also for the business models, we made a template, you can see on one side, for the